Hey everybody, I am Vince of Geekvolution, and welcome to Horror Movie Rewind. Warning, some of these images will be graphic. H.P. Lovecraft is a staple of horror literature. He is one of the most influential writers ever to weave a tale of terror. During his active years between the 19-teens and 1930s, he created several horror icons. Among his most recognizable are the Cthulhu mythos and Herbert West's Re-animator, which is a serialized short story that of course spawned the movie known as Re-animator, or H.P. Lovecraft Re-animator, however you choose to say it. If you have not read Lovecraft's work, then you're in luck. Neither have I. Therefore, my review pertains entirely to the confines of the 1985 film. When reviewing a film, the main question becomes, what constitutes a good movie? Furthermore, what qualities does this film possess that makes it either superior or inferior to others? It is a common misconception that there is a standard film by which to judge other films. A movie should be judged based on its own merits. Each film has a unique set of circumstances under which the film was created. Just because Citizen Kane is generally agreed to be the best film ever made does not mean that we should judge all films based on the quality of filmmaking that Citizen Kane represents. Consider this. Should the standards that are used to judge Citizen Kane be used to judge the Rocky Horror Picture Show? They are both widely considered good movies, but they are worlds apart in what makes them good. That being said, I will compare Re-animator to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the book, and by association the movie. Re-animator almost feels like a response to Frankenstein. The characters Victor Frankenstein and Herbert West have a lot in common, and therefore by no coincidence both narratives have similar themes. Both characters are driven by personal ambition, which ultimately leads to their demises at the hands of their own creations. Well, in the case of Herbert West, his supposed demise, because of course there's two sequels. Both characters reject their teachers as being closed-minded. Frankenstein believes that alchemists' theories should be given serious consideration. West believes that there is simply more to be learned about life-giving properties than modern science is willing to consider. They even share the same ambition for using science to cheat death. Both men are somewhat reckless in the idea that they don't consider the ramifications of their actions. They are so focused on the goal and possible fame that they damn themselves by creating their own respective monsters. The major reason that I compare Frankenstein and Re-animator is to reveal Re-animator's place between highbrow and lowbrow fiction. With all of its grotesqueries, the film puts itself in the range of fun but traditionally lowbrow cult cinema. But it is masquerading as highbrow with its obvious influence by classic literature. Is it meant to mock the influencer, or is it meant to celebrate it? It's difficult to determine, but let's consider the reason that the character's activities are frowned upon, and the outcomes. Frankenstein is firmly presented as a man who plays God. He ends up creating his own antagonist. Frankenstein's misery is the result of his own ambition. West is a man who defies the tradition of medical science and gives his antagonist more power. West is presented as a victim of the system. He has to conduct his experiments in secret due to the scrutiny that he would receive from the medical community. At the end of the second act, West is expelled from the university for these very activities. The establishment is represented by the main antagonist, his professor, Dr. Carl Hill, who is portrayed as a pervert, thief, and bully. The controlling idea seemingly becomes that the system prevents true genius and real progress. Therefore, Frankenstein's original controlling idea of ambition is damning is possibly subverted by Re-animator. However, early in the film, West intentionally ignites friction between Dr. Hill and himself. In this scene, West very publicly accuses Hill of filling the students' heads with closed-minded drivel. The scene is essential. While West's actions do possess a degree of nobility, he reveals himself to be impulsive and self-obsessed. The scene also reveals that Dr. Hill gained prominence in the medical community by plagiarizing a European doctor's research. Later in the film, Dr. Hill tries to steal West's research as a means of increasing Hill's own fame and fortune. These scenes are well constructed for both character and plot progression and serve to challenge what seems to be the controlling idea. If the major reason that West keeps his research under wraps is for fear of excommunication from the medical community, then why is it that Dr. Hill wants to steal West's research and present it as his own to that very community? What this shows is that West is not willing to go through the proper channels to get his research funded. His isolation is self-imposed due to his need to attain personal greatness. West only brings Daniel into his research after Daniel discovers West's secret. Therefore, I'm left to conclude that West is as much of a victim of his own ambition as Frankenstein. I have a final note regarding Frankenstein's influence on Re-animator. I feel that it is an opportune time to discuss homage versus theft. There are no new stories, but that doesn't mean that originality is impossible. As Captain Logan says, the writer's job is not to be entirely original, but rather to write the story as if it is original. Re-animator tackles too many similar themes to ignore Frankenstein's influence, but upon a cursory viewing, the relation could be missed. The rules in the Re-animator are somewhat askew. Ironically, West frequently refers to himself as a scientist, but the reagent holds no feasible scientific possibility. It simply exists and the audience buys it. This isn't really a flaw, but it's more like a clever joke. This movie is very much so fantasy over science fiction. Science is treated almost like magic. The reagent always causes a violent reaction, but it is uncertain as to the extent of the reagent's power. The reagent takes on the power that the writer deems necessary for the scene. It can revive a severely damaged body, be it animal or human. It can also revive individual body parts. At the beginning of the third act, West kills Dr. Hill and reanimates his head and his body. Oddly, Hill's head is able to control his severed body. Since Hill is a renowned brain surgeon, in the final scene Hill is able to find a way to control the minds of other reanimated corpses. Within the confines of this universe, science effectively becomes magic, even if the majority of the scientific community is unaware of it. The film is strangely light-hearted. In this scene, West flails around trying to free himself of the reanimated cat that has attached itself to his neck and the area between his shoulder blades. The scene ends with what is potentially one of the greatest moments in cinema history, when West pitches a cat into a wall. This lightheartedness persists throughout the film, despite the fact that the characters are deadly serious and there is a lot at stake within the situation. West is fully aware that by hiding his efforts in reanimation, he risks possible expulsion from the university and excommunication from the medical science community. Daniel risks his academic security by being romantically and sexually involved with Dean Halsey's expectedly virginal daughter, Megan. Megan is risking her father's wrath. Yada yada yada. I would almost say that it's lighthearted because the characters are serious. The logic seems to be that the characters take the situation seriously enough for everyone, so the audience can just enjoy it. At the beginning of the film, we are intended to be suspicious of West. He is presented as a possible antagonist, while the film's protagonist is Daniel Kane. In the first scene, we see West's reagent causing an old man excruciating pain. Subsequent scenes show him trying to preserve the secrecy of his research, while obviously feigning normal human social interaction. Until Daniel discovers West's research, West is seemingly one-dimensional, but the film plays an effective bait-and-switch and humanizes West and makes him the most complicated character in the film. I will not say that West is overacted, but he is more intense than any normal person. It's necessary to the tone of the film and his characterization. He is so intense that it's hard to take him seriously. After he is revealed not to be as evil as we are led to believe, his intensity becomes forgivable. He even becomes likable. Daniel Kane is the everyman. He is a talented medical student with a bright future in front of him, but he's no genius. He has a relationship with the woman he loves, but isn't so perfect as to remain chaste just to satisfy the expectations of her father. He's not a robot for the system of which he is clearly a part, but he is aware that his actions can hold ramifications. The story rightfully follows Daniel rather than West. Through Daniel, we are able to view West as an unbiased third party, and West is allowed to keep some of his mystique. Essentially, Daniel allows us to project ourselves into the film. When West invites Daniel into a research partnership, Daniel is leery to accept. However, we soon see that West's mad ambition is infective, and as the audience, we are able to catch some of that madness. Unfortunately, Megan Halsey, Dean Halsey, and Dr. Hill are flat. Dr. Hill is evil, Dean Halsey is an overprotective father, Megan is little more than an object of desire. Daniel's love for her seems genuine, but I tend to wonder why, because she has no personality. Dr. Hill's interest in her is purely sexual and becomes very apparent by the final scene. Re-animator defies convention and expectation. What makes Re-animator good are not the same things that make other films good. During some of my previous ventures into horror films, I've commented on the relation between horror and comedy. Some horror films have scenes that are intended to elicit laughter, some are just funny by way of error. When a film slips into humor on accident, it's a major flaw, even if it's ironically enjoyable. It presents a different tone than what the film organically produces for the scene. But when the humor is intentional, it fits the tone and advances the film. That's why Re-animator is so special. It's an interesting experiment in tone. The tone becomes more important to the development of the plot than the pseudoscience that drives it. I'll come back to tone later. This is the first time in Horror Movie Rewind that I've tackled a horror comedy. So should it be judged as a horror film or a comedy? The way I believe that this subgenre should be approached is as a horror film with the understanding that much of the extremes, be they violent, sexual, or whatever, are intended to be funny, and some leeway should be given to the film if it's not particularly frightening. The interesting thing about Re-animator is that it really is a scary movie. There are genuine moments of fear and discomfort. I found myself worried for the general existence of mankind within the universe because it becomes clear that the characters have very little control over the situation. In this scene, Daniel and Herbert break into the medical school's morgue in order to reanimate a human body. Given the incident with the cat earlier in the film, they know that newly reanimated bodies can be violent. They conduct their experiment without any means of restraint for the cadaver. I suppose it could be argued that they are operating under minimal budget with no time for the bells and whistles of a full experiment complete with safety precautions. But how hard is it to buy some belts and strap the body to the gurney? They knew the reanimated body would be dangerous. Their actions were reckless. Granted, this scene does take place after both men are ousted from the university, and the point is obviously that they had no choice to conduct their experiment illegally and without regard for personal safety. But it further illustrates the recklessness brought on by mad ambition. This scene is significant due to the way the tension develops. When the body is reanimated, of course it attacks its reanimators, and ultimately the dean of the school. What's odd about this scene is that the reanimated corpse is given far too much time to attack these men in order to preserve the same fear-causing tension that the scene initially inspires. The intent of the scene shifts. It becomes less about frightening and more about entertaining. The body grimaces and attacks, and the men desperately try to resolve the issue. The scene pretty much plays out in real time, for the most part in one room. Rather than becoming overdrawn and tedious, it becomes comical. The men constantly launch new efforts and evasions. This keeps the tension high. Usually the gags in horror films are fast and destructive. They abruptly make their presence, then are either fended off or the scene is cut to splice in events taking place elsewhere. It breaks the tension and keeps the moment from becoming stale. Re-animator lets the scene continue past the expected cut. In fact, the film feeds on the resulting awkwardness. The viewer becomes acclimated to the extremes, and they therefore lose their original effect. Since the scene's humor is based largely on violent physical gags derived from the fact that neither Daniel nor Herbert have any clue what they're doing beyond reanimating a body, it almost becomes slapstick, or splatstick if you prefer the term. Re-animator walked a fine line and managed to turn a potential negative into the film's biggest asset. The tone and plot work hand in hand to bring about the conclusion of the film. Characters are firmly established as a means of building logical character choices later in the film. Dr. Hill is said to be a thief, therefore when he tries to steal West's research, it's no surprise. West is intense and impulsive, so it would make sense that he would kill to further his research. The plot develops logically, however the science does not. Since the reagent has undefined potential, it results in third act anarchy. Without the tone, the anarchy that is the ending of this film would seem unfounded. If the film had not been a little silly around the edges, the pseudoscience would not have worked, and this film would have suffered from the dreaded third act syndrome. By maintaining lightheartedness, the film asks its audience to suspend disbelief to allow for the extreme possibilities of the reagent. Had it been played straight, that would have been a hard pill to swallow. Luckily, the reagent is in a syringe. Ba-dum-ching. Usually a silly movie is only a novelty. However, I can't ignore the thought that was put into the Re-animator. Herbert West is iconic within the horror community. He's a modern Frankenstein. I can't say that Re-animator is a perfect film since major characters are flat, but maybe that's the price to be paid for the unique pacing. Since it's a clever mix between highbrow and lowbrow, I'll give Re-animator 4 out of 5. Thanks for watching Horror Movie Rewind. Join me next time for my review of American Psycho.